Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone who's joining us today. It's a pleasure to welcome you all in this session on social protection in a changing climate. What are the linkages? My name is Shayanti Sengupta, and I am based in Berlin, and I work with the Red Cross Red Crescent Climate Center, mostly in the portfolio of social protection. The picture that you see in the screen right now is an island in India. And this place used to be a whole village where people used to live. At this point, this picture that I took a few years ago, there has been so many floods that the people had to migrate or move out of this island. This island is also expected to sink in the next 10 years, according to the disaster management predictions of the National Disaster Management Authority in India. As I grew up in a city which has 20 billion people, and I would always travel to distribute relief to the villages. But in this year, there were enough floods in my own city that I didn't have to go to a village to distribute relief. So what I'm trying to get at, it's not about a rural, urban thing anymore. Climate risks is everywhere, and we are going to face it, be it in urban or be it in the rural areas. If you see this map here, this shows the risk index 2020. This shows the 10 most countries which has been affected by weather-related loss in this year. The point I was trying to make, it's not about the global north and global south either anymore. There is Canada and Germany, which had highest losses in the last year. And there is India, Philippines, and Sri Lanka, which also faced equal amount of losses this year. So climate risks has pervaded boundaries. It has pervaded different countries, and climate risks is affecting everybody at the moment. In this session, we are going to look at social protection and how social protection can possibly be used as an instrument for addressing these risks. We would also look at the evidence that we have so far and if it is worth considering for long-term risks and adaptation. In this session, we would like to have a Ignite by Cecilia Costella. She is the Senior Technical Officer in Red Cross Red Crescent Climate Center, and she has more than 13 years of experience in climate and disaster risk management with several organizations like World Bank, World Food Programme, and as an advisor to the national governments. I would like to invite Cecilia to tell us a little bit more about social protection and if we think that social protection instruments can be useful for climate-related risks.
Thank you, Sayanti, and welcome everyone. So let me share my screen. 1 second. As I was saying, to those that just arrived, feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat, so we can also see where you come from and your interest in this session. I think this should be. Is the slide showing now?
Yes.
And is it now on full screen?
Yes.
Great. Yeah, so I realized that the term social protection might mean different things and might be sometimes a very sort of technical term, and some of you might be interested to know how we're thinking about it here. So we thought we would start by giving you a definition of what is social protection, at least what we mean by social protection in the context of this conversation today. And we mean the set of policies and programs aimed at reducing poverty, reducing vulnerability, and promoting social inclusion for vulnerable people. And I think it's important to reflect on this idea of vulnerable people, because essentially social protection is intended to be for those who need it, not necessarily for the poorest, but for those that might be vulnerable to shocks and to different types of individual and covariate shocks. And I think one important characteristics of social protection in the way that we think about it in this work is that is mostly sort of led by governments or owned by national governments, and it's part of sort of the social policy approach of a specific country and government, unlike, for instance, things like humanitarian action, right? So this is what we have in mind. And to exemplify this a little bit more, I just wanted to share this graph that I find quite useful, because essentially here we see like different instruments that are part of social protection. So social assistance, which many of you might be familiar with, is the cash and in-kind transfers and safety nets, school feedings and social pensions. And then there is social insurance, contributory pensions, health insurance, and employment benefits, labor interventions, employment programs, labor market interventions, active labor market interventions, and other social services like nutrition, disability services, and things like that are usually considered part of social protection. And this is the universe of formal social protection, and then there's also informal social protection, which are schemes that happen at community level or at local levels, such as like savings or funeral insurance schemes. And in this graph, what we see is that these different instruments interact to protect and support people across the life cycle, both in times of shocks, but also in terms of sort of human development and long-term development. So for instance, conditional cash transfers and nutrition and social services are there to support families in the long term, as well as, for instance, employment training, contributory employment, and health and pensions. So with this in mind, we wanted to talk about a little bit what this means for climate risk management. And here I have a bit of a visual. So essentially, I think when we think about climate risk, we tend to focus on shocks and extreme events and the possibility or the likelihood that this will increase and will become larger and more dangerous with climate change. But when we think about social protection as a way of dealing with the risks that climate change will bring about, we want to sort of take a step back and look at sort of that disaster risk management and climate risk management continuum, right? Which includes risk mitigation, risk coping, and risk reduction. And social protection, unlike disaster response or humanitarian action, has a role across this whole risk management functions, not just after a shock happened or in response to a shock. So here, this is just a little graph to highlight that message, essentially, that through, for instance, ex ante preventive measures, social protection can contribute to mitigate risk. So, for instance, public works programs that have a disaster risk reduction element in it can mitigate the impacts of, for instance, particular shocks like floods and things like that. But also just the regular support provided by regular cash transfers can have this effect of mitigating the impacts of a particular shock. And then risk coping has to do with protective measures to support people when they are hit by a shock. So, for instance, scaling up cash transfers in response to a shock is something that is now becoming very, very common and very talked about. And there is this idea of, shock responsive social protection as part of this function of protecting people against the immediate impacts of shocks. But there's also ways in which social protection can contribute to long-term risk reductions through promotive measures, through supporting, long-term, providing long-term support to livelihoods and income generation activities and those types of activities. So just to give you a few examples of what we mean by all these functions. So there are a few examples, and actually we were talking about this before the session started, like how there are these sort of flagship examples that we kind of tend to come to, but I think it's because they are very good examples of what we mean, and they're also very large programs, and sometimes these are not the only programs that are around, but some other programs might be smaller or might have less features that are climate related. But so the three examples I wanted to just share with you is the Kenya Hunger Safety Net program, the India MREGA program, and Ethiopia's PSMP, which some of you might have heard about. But so the Kenya Safety Net program is a cash transfer program, which also has an element of shock response, in which when a particular shock happens, particularly a drought, but sometimes it has been used for floods as well, it triggers a certain level of additional payments to existing beneficiaries and to people that might have become, might have been hit by the shock. So people that perhaps were not regular benefits of the program, but then become affected by this particular shock. The MREGA program in India is the largest public works programs in the world. Essentially, what this means is a program that gives cash to people for in exchange for building assets. And I think one of the most interesting, or two of the most interesting features of this program are one, that it provides a guarantee, 100 days of work guarantee per year to people that want it, and that also focuses many of the activities that these people do in the public works programs are focused on natural resource management and disaster risk reduction type of works. And finally, Ethiopia Productive Safety Net program is one that combines a little bit elements of these other two programs. Essentially, there is a direct cash transfer. There is also a direct cash transfer in times of shocks. And it also has this public works component, and it's one of the largest programs in Africa. And here what you see, the checks are some of the outcomes that we know social protection programs are able to create. These are not the direct outcomes of all of these programs, but although many of these programs do have these outcomes. For instance, the Ethiopia PSMP has shown to increase food security and food consumption. But I think what we wanted to show here is that in general, we know that social protection is able to support these type of outcomes, and in a way they relate to that ability of the program to build that long-term resilience to climate-related shocks, but also to gradual changes in lives and livelihoods. Then the next slide, and just to finish, where are we now? So for a long time, we've been building frameworks for, to sort of explain the role of social protection for climate risk management. One of the most well-known ones is the Adaptive Social Protection Framework, which you might have heard about. And more recently, there has been a framework called the Shock Responsive Social Protection Framework, which they sort of speak to different areas of risk management and the role of social protection. So the Adaptive Social Protection Framework in general has tended to focus on this idea that DRR, climate change adaptation, and social protection can come together to sort of reduce risks and help people cope with the impacts of shocks. Whereas the shock responsive social protection is focused on, that shock response aspect of it beyond just climate related shocks. But I just wanted to show this also because Dominic is going to reflect a little bit more on where we are now based on these frameworks. So I'll leave it at that, and I hope that we'll have a chance to discuss a bit more during the rest of the session.
Thanks, Cecilia. I think you've mentioned a very interesting point, that social protection is supposed to probably address the whole continuum, but we are kind of responding to shocks at the moment. And let's see what Dominique has to say about this. Meanwhile, if there are questions, we would please request you to write them on the chat, and during the wrap up, we would try to include them in our responses. So Dominique, over to you.
Yes, thanks. And also thanks, Cecilia, for nicely pointing out the different opportunities that we actually have by linking social protection to different other sectors. And I feel that you rightly mentioned that especially this vulnerability aspect and really this risk aspect, risks are getting more and more complex these times. So it's also good to have the approaches in order to reduce those risks also in a more complex and also holistic way. And I feel this is something where adaptive social protection, but also shock responsive social protection can definitely add on. However, there are a lot of challenges, and you rightly mentioned there are two approaches with adaptive social protection, but also shock responsive social protection. And I feel that both of them are rather derived from protection perspective, that you really trying to address climate risks and also disaster risks that you face with social protection tools. And this is definitely right, and this is a very good approach. However, I feel that always, if you look at the different approach, that you also have to look from both sides and from both perspectives. I feel that this is currently missing also in the debate that we have, that we see in the political debate, but also scientific debate around this topic. That often the climate change perspective and also disaster risk perspective is not really considered. And this is also quite obvious if you look at the general approach, because as you also mentioned, Cecilia, you have climate risks that are trying to be addressed by social protection mechanisms. But I feel that you have to look at the risk first, because there's a so-called approach such as the risk layering, where you look at different layers of risk. So why are people vulnerable? To what are they vulnerable? And based on this risk, then decide which kind of mechanism you choose. And I feel that social protection, and especially adaptive social protection, provides a solution for a lot of these problems. But there are certainly also limits of this approach. And to also directly link this to the figure that you showed with the three circles that you have, I mean, there are certainly overlaps of these different sectors, and we should definitely seize the coherence benefits that we see between those sectors. However, I think it's also very important to mention that, of course, the core sectors, or the routine systems as they're often called, and they should, of course, also be further elaborated. So you can't really merge everything into adaptive social protection, because this is simply not possible. But you should also consider the different sectoral goals and the sectoral strategies that you have, and keep them, because oftentimes they have been also another challenge that I definitely see, and I worked in the past a lot on data, is the different understanding of risk, and also data that is out there for social protection, but also for risks. I mean, we have a lot of different research projects that assess different risks on different levels, but if we now really try to address risk in a complex way, in a holistic way, then we also have to broaden our understanding of risk. And yeah, there we often see in our project work that if we try to work together with different sectors, so for example, the environmental ministry, but then also the Ministry of Social Affairs, that these often have a very different understanding of risk. And I feel this is like the very first step that we have to address before actually planning any adaptive social protection or shock responsive social protection mechanisms, that we look at the different understandings and really trying to bring different actors to the table and to jointly develop a joint understanding of, like, who is at risk, who is the most vulnerable, what do they need in terms of protection, where are protection gaps. So yeah, I feel that this is the very first step, and this is even complicated because there is not too much evidence out there. I mean, the programs that we see and also the whole debate on adaptive social protection is not really that elaborated yet, because it evolved like around 10 years ago. So evidence is still lacking in terms of research, how conceptually ASP, for example, can be approached. This is still a huge research gap. But also on program effectiveness. I mean, if we especially talk about climate change impacts and how social protection can help to address climate change impacts, we can't really assess that right now after 10 years, because climate change always has a very long-term perspective. And I feel this is something that will manifest in the future, in how far these social protection mechanisms are really designed to then also address these climate risks. Yeah, and I think there's a lot to do, a lot on our agendas, but I think there's also hope on the horizon, so to say. because we have a lot of actors that kind of jump on this topic. I mean, the World Bank just recently released their flagship report on adaptive social protection, where they also contributed a lot to the understanding of ASP. The understanding can definitely be debated, and I feel that this is also a good entry point then for others to come in and jump on these concepts, and also trying to then elaborate them and also see how they really apply on the ground in different well, realities that we face in different countries, also given political systems and so forth. Yeah, so I think, again, a lot of evidence is still lacking, but I feel that research is currently really covering that. And I hope that also within this session that we can maybe even contribute to an enhanced understanding, and maybe then also see in how far we can contribute to yeah, maybe reduce this lack of evidence.
Many thanks, Dominic, for your insights. I think you hit the nail. I mean, social protection has potential, but the evidence is still lacking. But we have seen after the COVID, social protection got so much traction, and the nature of climate risk itself is changing. So we do not know how far the potential will be. But given that we expect social protection to be used more and more and to be taken up by national governments and different international organizations, I think we need to make a start, and we need to consider what are the challenges around it right now. If we are going to build and modify these systems and adapt it, we should start what is wrong now, and what are the challenges that we're facing, and what are the things that we can probably do better in the coming years. So this brings us to the next part of our session. I will be giving a link in the chat for everyone to open. This is a link to a Google Doc, and the link has 3 cartoons. The cartoons have a message, but the message is open to interpretation. So every one of you, please open the link in your windows and go into the document and have a look. Just look at the cartoons for 2-3 minutes. I'll be sending you into breakout rooms. I would request all of you to probably switch on your camera when you're talking to the participants in your group, to kind of interact in a more, by looking at each other's face, if possible, and have a look at the cartoons. Just think what it makes you feel, and come up with a message, with a key message that you think we should keep in mind when social protection is going to be considered for addressing climate risks. The instructions are also there in the Google Doc, and I would hope everybody has the link and has no problem accessing it. I will be opening up the breakout rooms now. Unless there is any question or any problem, you can stay back in the plenary and let me know. Hi, Dunya. Can you hear me?
Hi, yes, sorry, I mixed up the times. That's why I'm late.
No problem. We are doing a group exercise right now.
Okay.
Would you be interested to go into one of the rooms?
How many more minutes is it?
It's still 10 minutes to go.
Okay. Okay, yes.
Okay, then I'm just going to put you in one of the rooms. And if you can see in the chat, I just copied a link. If you could click in that link and the instructions are there, you have to discuss with your group members. There are cartoons in this document and come up with a key message to share. So the cartoons are related to social protection challenges. So if you can have a look at the document, and then I'll send you into a room to discuss. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think it still makes sense for me? It's a bit of it's unfortunate that I missed the start.
I think it's fine because the first 3 minutes are anyway to have a look at the cartoon on your own, and then they start discussing. So it's
Okay.
fine.
Okay, sure.
Great. Can you see your invite in front of you?
Yes, room 1.
Yes.
Okay.
Perfect. See you
Thank you.
later.
See you.
Hi, Sophia. Can you hear me? Hi, Miguel. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Great. We are in between a breakout room session where the participants are discussing on social protection and climate. I think it's a bit late for you to join in one of the groups, but I'm gonna copy a Word document in the chat. If you can have a look, this is what the exercise is about. The document has cartoons that is supposed to provoke some thinking. So if you would like, you can have a look at the cartoons and try to understand what the messages we are trying to give.
Perfect. I will have a look. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And the breakout rooms will be over in 5 minutes. So they will be back and there will be some discussion here.
Okay, no worries. Thank you very much. Is this a project that is taking place in a specific place, or is it just a general idea? Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, no. So I work with the Red Cross, Red Crescent Climate Center, and we work in different parts of the world. So we have ongoing projects in Nepal, Bangladesh, Nigeria. So we have various ongoing work with the different national governments, trying to strengthen the social protection systems in these governments and as advisory, and how to better prepare for anticipatory action using forecasts or risk profiling and things like that. So in this session, we haven't focused on any particular region, but in general, yeah, what we are sharing is what we work with. Yeah.
Nice.
And where are you joining in from?
So I will put on my camera. I'm from Mexico, but I am based in Brazil.
Okay.
I am working with social innovation for disaster risk reduction. So I just joined a little bit late. Sorry.
It's no problem. Maybe you could open the Google Doc and you had a look at the cartoons, and maybe you can, in the discussion, maybe you can share something, some message that you think that the cartoon is trying to give. And yeah, they will be back in 1 minute. So I think they will share some inputs from the groups. And then, yeah. Okay. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
I see some smiley faces and cameras on, so I would imagine that the discussion was fine. And maybe you had some time to reflect on the cartoons that you saw. We had 4 groups, so maybe we would like to hear some reflections very quickly. Group number 1, there was Dominique, Dunya, and Aska. Maybe one of you would like to sum up something, some reflections from the cartoons.
You're on mute, Oscar.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. Well, many things revolving around the cartoon. It was mainly around participation. We were looking at the like where it says like where the money has to be allocated, and like how to prioritize around many things that governments and many things where people it's like interest in allocating money. And definitely how stakeholders want to participate, but how also the governments are just looking at it and like prioritizing when everything it's being pushed and stressed out by what a disaster-prone areas, how disaster it's like stirring up everything and making these like a huge challenge. It was mostly that.
Thank you. That's very important. Prioritization, not only for the governments, but also in terms of the international organizations, right?
Sure.
So, okay, maybe moving on to group 2. Becky, Harrison, and Maria. Would any one of you like to share something from the group?
I can speak for the group if they like. Oh, apart from there we go. So yeah, really great cartoons actually. My thoughts are clearest in my head, although I think we also discussed. I mean, one of the thoughts for cartoon 1 was about how just it demonstrates how important it is to have some some dedicated funds, so you don't get into this ridiculous situation of a statue being potentially prioritized over people needing money to live and survive. So that was certainly my thought on one, but many actors involved in that one. Are we doing all 3?
Yes, if you would like to, sure.
Number 2, yeah, well, we had quite some sort of debate as to the guy in the boat, whether he, his lack of awareness of the urgency. So there was something about the right aid at the right time. And then there's this like, why isn't he helping them into the boat? So there's also this, how willing he is to provide the right help at the right time. So, and how aware or not he really is of the situation there. And for the 3rd one, I think it certainly, for me, it was about the importance of not of getting other information. So the person on the right here is trusting out of date printout from the office, clearly can see the guy's cow is actually dead, but is not noticing it. So the danger of using incomplete or out of date information to make decisions relating to social protection.
Thanks, Becky. I think that was quite a clear sum up of the cartoons and messages that one could draw. I would be very interested to go to group 3 and see what Cecilia, Tura, and Sulochana might have discussed. If one of you could sum up quickly.
One of us, Sulochana, was not able to access the cartoons, but Tura, do you want to share something?
Yeah, so hi, this is Duri Mahmood, and I'm from Pakistan. So I'm working on we're working on the implementation of one of the poverty reduction strategy, which we've developed. So I mean, these cartoons are pretty accurate in terms of the relation. I could pretty much relate to it. So I would just jump to the second one, where what I want to say is that the climate emergencies and the climate risks are really not integrated in the budget. For example, in our country, we face a lot of issues like, floods, drought, recently locust attack. So that really is a challenge because, when you're doing relief and aid and all those sort of things, or perhaps design social protection programs on housing and be the enterprise programs. So these things are not integrated really. So that needs to be, there needs to be a lot of thinking that needs to go in when making these policies, or perhaps the budget, that, where are we putting the climate emergency relief, and how are we integrating that in the system? It's still it's a question mark. The third one is really important that, I would rather give another example from the World Bank's old poverty scorecards. We still use those sort of indicators to disperse money from the social protection. And then again, those are blind on the climate part. So we need to have a different design when we're talking about social protection programs for the climate adaptation or mitigation. We need to come up with a different framework. Yeah. So yeah.
Great. Thanks, Durid. I think we have covered a few of the very key points in this. Maybe quickly going on to the group 4, Bob, Marianne, and Sebastian, if one of you would like to share something.
I can quickly say something if nobody else wants to. I just put in the chat box our 3 pithy and powerful things. That was my job. The other 2 did a much better job of saying the poignant and important things. But the main things of looking at those images were much better said by the other groups. But I think that in the first one, the idea that there's many different competing interests. So the idea was to make sure that the Adaptive Social Protection Fund should be previously allocated so that at the time that we need them, we don't need to be competing over them with other interests. For the second one, which tied in very nicely with the first one, the idea is that the people are already in the boat and they should have already prepared, but sometimes preparedness is not going to cover the needs that you have. So there needs to be some adaptive social protection to enable that. So when proactive preparedness isn't enough, avoid the wait with adaptive risk financing for social protection. And then in the final one, as was already mentioned, the guy should not be looking just at his list, but he should be flexible and seeing that the guy's cow is already dead and not just thinking about what people had before and just because they are already wealthy that they may still need something. So there may be different understandings of what adaptive capacity is. So our summary for that: avoid rigidity. What is on your list of what people own may not reflect different understandings of their adaptive capacity.
Great, Bob. I think we have touched upon some very key points: core funding, proactiveness, and flexibility of the social protection systems. And I'm very happy that the cartoons could ignite these kind of thought processes and could come across and could, I hope you had a great time. I would quickly go to our 2 speakers, Dominique first and Cecilia, to sum up and to kind of elaborate on some of the key points that have been touched on by the different participants. So Dominique, maybe.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I guess the cartoons provided, and as we just discussed, provided a very nice overview of some of the challenges that we face, right? I mean, competing interests, but then also maybe not really the side and how far this can also elaborate on benefits, because oftentimes we do see economic benefits if we work together, if we try to combine different processes that we have. So in the long run, it might be a bit costly. So that's why governments might not really choose to jump on this train. But in the long term, I think it's definitely also in terms of economic benefits, it provides a lot of benefits, I would say. But also in terms of flexibility of programs, not only to looking at a shock response, but rather trying to really have a more holistic view and really trying to make a program adaptive and not really just like look on response, but also really trying to do something in advance, trying to improve the preparedness and really trying to look at people's vulnerabilities and really trying to look at people's well-being instead of just looking at their very obvious conditions based on indicators that we have, but that is kind of then misleading. So as you mentioned, the flexibility of programs is really good, important. And then also obviously the right selection of data and really looking at the needs. This is really core. So again, maybe to sum up, a lot of challenges that we face, but I think also, as I said, a lot of good ways forward. So yeah, hopefully this will further help in reducing the challenges that we see.
Perfect. Cecilia.
Thank you. Yeah, so thanks for that. Thanks everyone. And Dominic, I think you've summarized the main points very well. So I'm not going to repeat that, but so I actually just wanted to highlight something that came up of our group discussion that was not necessarily related to the cartoons, but that I think is, so crucial, especially to sort of like the last bits around sort of considering climate risk. And we were saying, like in places like in Pakistan, for instance, there is a poverty reduction strategy which does not consider climate yet, right? So if we, how do we move that forward? Because essentially climate, it's going to be very difficult to do poverty reduction if we don't consider climate, right? Especially with sort of growing risks, growing, intensity and frequency of extremes, and also with just like the changes to the slow, gradual changes to lives and livelihoods and jobs and everything that climate change is going to mean for the transformation of our societies and in all countries, really. So I think that this, we've highlighted some really great challenges in terms of the sort of the programmatic and policy decisions that need to be made to make sure that those things become a bit more integrated. But I think it's key for us to keep thinking, how do we make sure that we continue to make those linkages? How do we make sure to explore what this poverty and climate change connection means, and what is it that governments, what are the instruments that governments have to sort of take action on that front? And social protection is definitely one of them. With that, I just wanted to conclude. I think it was a really great session. It was really nice to have time to talk to people in the group discussions, and really great cartoons, Sayanti.
Thanks, Cecilia. I think we are doing good on time. We still have 3 minutes to go. I know it might have been a bit rushed, but I think in this understanding risk session, we have understood a few of the risks, we have understood a few of the challenges, and we've understood there's much to do. And be it a research paper or be it a project that we're maybe looking at, it's important to kind of keep on making these linkages and seeing, kind of trying to put, okay, we have not probably covered the risk lens or the climate risk or the climate lens or the management lens, and what can we bring together in our own areas of work as well. So thanks for everybody who has joined in today, and I had a great session, and I hope you could also take some things back. And yeah, if there are any last words, please feel free to just pop in and say goodbye and thank you. Otherwise, it was a pleasure having all of you here. Thanks, and have a good day from my side.
Bye, everyone. It was nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining in.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, Bob.
Thanks. It would be great
Thanks
to
very
join
much.
you in the next sessions.
Hopefully,
Thanks for
see you in
joining.
another one.
Bye, everyone.
Bye,
Bye,
Dunya.
Yeah, to see you.
Thanks for joining in.
Yeah, sorry it was so late, so I got mixed up.
No problem. Okay.
Even Dominic left.
Yeah. Okay. Steve, do we have anything to do right now, or I can just send you the recorded session after?
Yes, if you could do that recorded session to the WeTransfer link. Did the hosts manage to record anything in the breakouts?
I did ask I had Cecilia in one room, and I could only ask one of them. So I'm going to ask him if he had any recording. Yeah.
So when we close this meeting, it will obviously ask to save that
Yeah.
file, and it'll render out, and then we'll go for it. So hopefully they'll be asked to do the same. Great.
Yeah.
Excellent. Looked like it went well. Sounded good.
Yeah,
Thanks,
it
Steve.
went really well. It was nice and short and sweet.
Perfect. That's what you want, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well done.
Great. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank
you
you.
too. Thank
You
you.
too. Thanks for your
Bye-bye.
support. Bye.
No problem.